All right, so with that audio, excellent, thank you. Audio looking good now. I can welcome you for real this time to this presentation as part of the GreyLearning Live webinar series. Here, yes, exactly. Welcome to technology. Very good point. And so now I have to once again give a shout out to Mark for tuning in all the way from Belgium, then letting me know that there was an audio problem in terms of there being zero audio, and then turned out there was an even bigger problem with the audio with some echoing issues. So hopefully all of that, it sounds like, all perfectly squared away. And I'm noticing in the comments, folks, not just from Belgium, but all over the United States and some other international. Do we see any other international visitors? Not yet that I'm catching. Anyway, I'm sure there's more in the comments. I won't spend too much time scrolling through those to see what else we can come up with. But in any event, welcome. Thank you so much. George from Canada, thanks for tuning in from Canada and the UK. So we do have some other international participants. So thank you very much for tuning in. And again, as I've mentioned, well, now I've lost track because we had a rocky start with the audio. So in case I haven't mentioned it, I'll mention again that the topic today, an issue that photographers have struggled with, and I get a lot of feedback from photographers not understanding collections and how they differ from folders, but also struggling with folders, in some cases without even realizing that they're struggling with folders, insofar as creating a mess. And I think of this in two different ways in terms of a mess. One is getting folders that are missing, photos that are missing, just kind of a mess in terms of Lightroom Classic, not knowing where your folders really are, but also just having a mess in terms of your overall organizational structure for folders. So I'm going to talk about some of those details today as we talk about Lightroom Classic. And a lot of the folders aspect relates not just to Lightroom Classic, but since I wanted to talk about collections too, the presentation is aimed toward Lightroom Classic, but the concepts related to folders really would apply more universally. And a UK resident on holiday in France. I'm sure that's wonderful at the moment. All right, so I'm Tim Gray, in case you weren't already aware of who you were listening to, of who you had tuned into. You might know me from my Ask Tim Gray email newsletter, which has been published now continuously it's been over 23, I believe it'll be 24 years this November, which not only means that I'm old at this point, but also that I've been publishing that email for quite a long time. I do want to mention a couple of things, by the way, that are coming up. One is if you're interested in Lightroom Classic, as well as some of the other variations on Lightroom, I will be presenting actually 3 sessions at the upcoming Lightroom Virtual Summit. Those will be on topics of defining your workflow strategies, of backing up your photos, another really important topic, and photos on the map, keeping track of the location where you captured your particular photos. And so some, I think, important topics that I'll be covering, along with a variety of other instructors that will be talking on a variety of different subjects. That's going to be September 15th through the 19th. You can sign up for free. There is a link down at the bottom there, bit.ly, so bit.ly/Grey, Grey, Summit 25. You can sign up for free. There's also a VIP pass if you're interested in getting access to the recordings, notes from all of the instructors, etc. So go check that out. It's going to be a fun event. I'm looking forward to presenting. And I mentioned a mess in Lightroom Classic. If you've got a mess, or you want to avoid a mess, I do have a video course that I recently completely updated on the topic of cleaning up your mess in Lightroom Classic. If you use coupon code WebinarMess, which is actually, I was going to say, that doesn't mean this webinar is a mess. It's just the coupon code for the Cleaning Up Your Mess course. But those of you who tuned in live who got, I was going to say the benefit, who didn't have the video edited after the fact, if you're tuning in later, you missed all the fun with some audio problems. So this webinar was a little bit of a mess, so I guess all the more fitting that I used that coupon code. WebinarMess will get you $20 off. You can go to greylearning.com to find that course. But let's go ahead and dive in. One other option for you along the way, if you've got questions, I'll try to pay attention to the comments. There tend to be lots and lots of comments going through YouTube there, and so I'll try to pay attention there, but your better bet is to go to timgray.me lightroom.com/question. That will take you to a Google form where you can type in a question. You don't need to share your contact information, but if you do put your email address in there and I'm not able to get to your question today, I will try to get to that question at a later time, possibly include it in an Ask Tim Gray email newsletter in the near future. So timgray.me/question. I'll take you to that Google form if you want to send a question my way. But now, without further ado, let's really get to the topic at hand, which is folders and collections in Lightroom Classic. I want to start off with what I consider to be my most important rule. So I often make this big and bold and say, so sorry for yelling. Sorry, not sorry, but sorry for yelling about this really most important rule in Lightroom Classic. I made it really, really big so that it would, okay, I made it too big so that it would really stand out. Now you can't even read the text. Don't worry, I've got a quick fix. The most important rule: initiate everything in Lightroom Classic. Whatever it is that you want to do with your photos, with your folders, with your collections, editing your photos, make sure to initiate everything in Lightroom Classic. And in the context of today's presentation, that primarily relates to folders. Collections are not available outside of Lightroom Classic, so you'd have a hard time doing anything with those outside of Lightroom Classic. Well, I guess technically they're available as albums in the cloud if you're using the cloud synchronization, but I digress. Folders, it's really critical. Do not go outside of Lightroom Classic and rename a folder or move a folder or rename photos, etc. Do all of that work inside of Lightroom Classic. I'm going to talk about some of the things that you can do in terms of changing your folder structure within Lightroom Classic, but make sure that you're doing that in Lightroom Classic. That is the number one most important thing that I could possibly share with you in terms of not getting a mess in Lightroom Classic, is that you've got to initiate. If you make changes outside of Lightroom Classic, then Lightroom Classic doesn't know about it. If you make changes within Lightroom Classic, those changes will be reflected on the hard drive. So let's take a look at that. We'll go ahead and jump over to Lightroom Classic. And I'm also going to bring up a folder here out in my operating system. So first and foremost, we're here to talk about folders and collections. We're going to start with folders. So an obvious question. So obvious that we probably don't need to ask the question, but what is a folder? That's silly, right? A folder is a folder. I hope it's safe for me to assume that everybody knows what a folder is. So for example, if I bring a window out from my operating system, you can see a set of folders. And so here is a folder from a trip to Croatia, the Istrian Peninsula. And within that folder, we can see that there are some photos captured in Croatia, along with their XMP sidecar files as it happens. And so the folders contain my photos. And I bring those up in the operating system first and foremost just to sort of familiarize yourself with the fact, or to reinforce the fact really, that folders are folders. That when we see folders over in Lightroom Classic, this is on the folders, in the folders section of the left panel in the library module, the folders in Lightroom Classic directly correspond to folders in the operating system. And so we should see all of those. So here's Austria 2012, and over on the right side, so in Lightroom we see Austria 2012, 18 and 19, 2012, 18 and 19, there's Croatia, the trip to Istria, and then a cross-country road trip, etc. So again, the key point there is that folders in Lightroom relate to folders on the hard drive. You could have folders on multiple hard drives. You might have folders that represent just a subset. So maybe you have a hard drive that's full of all sorts of things, including some folders of photos. And so you might not have all of your folders reflected in Lightroom Classic because you'll only see those that contain photos that are being managed by Lightroom Classic. But the general concept is a folder in Lightroom Classic directly relates to a folder on the hard drive. In fact, I'm going to close this window out on the hard drive. And if I go to the folders section here on the left panel in the library module, I'll right-click and choose to show in folder. Show in Finder, I should say. If you're a Windows user, then that would be Show in Explorer. And you'll see that a window comes up in the operating system and the applicable folder. So I right-clicked on Southwest Road Trip, and it's right over there. Southwest Road Trip is the folder out on the hard drive. So again, just the notion that the folders on the hard drive directly correspond to a folder. Well, a folder in Lightroom Classic directly corresponds to a folder on your hard drive in the operating system, so to speak. And so you can see that there's generally going to be a direct relationship. And this is why it's so important to make changes within Lightroom Classic, not out on the hard drive. If I renamed this folder out on the hard drive, it would become a missing folder in Lightroom Classic because it would no longer be where it was expected, or it would no longer have the name that was expected based on what Lightroom Classic is looking for. And so again, very simple, very fundamental, but important that folders in Lightroom Classic represent folders on your hard drive. Pretty straightforward. I'm sure we've all dealt with folders on the hard drive. I'm sure we've also all dealt with folders in Lightroom Classic. And so just important to understand what those folders are. Collections are different. And oh yeah, great question. So I see Polka Dot Studio, cute name. This will work if main folders are on an external hard drive? Yes, absolutely. I don't happen to be using an external hard drive because I already have all sorts of accessories plugged into my computer, so I don't need one more when I'm demonstrating like this. But if that was on an external hard drive, that's no problem at all. The only sort of caveat there is if I disconnect that external hard drive, all of those folders will be missing. That's okay. Just plug the hard drive back in and you're back in business. And in fact, even with that external hard drive disconnected, if you've built previews for your images, you can still, without the photos available, without your external hard drive even connected to the computer, not even in the same room as you, with that external hard drive disconnected, you can still browse your photos based on the previews. You can still update the metadata. You can add keywords, assign star ratings, etc., even without the source files being available. The only thing you can't essentially do is to work in the develop module or export photos unless you've also generated smart previews for those images. So what is a collection? Well, a collection, it's understandably a little bit confusing because collections behave like folders. They seem to be similar to folders. So here I go and select a collection and I see images just as though I had clicked on a folder. The difference is that collections don't exist on the hard drive. You might say collections don't exist at all. They're just a figment of our imagination, if you will, within Lightroom Classic. A collection simply represents a grouping of photos. It does not relate to the hard drive directly, meaning that a collection does not reflect a folder on your hard drive. It's just a way that I've grouped photos together. And the way I often describe collections, especially smart collections, which we'll take a look at a little bit later, is that a collection is like a saved search result. So just like I can say, hey, Lightroom Classic, show me all my 5-star images, or show me all my images that have a keyword waterfall, or show me all my images that have a pick flag, or that have a reject flag, or a red color label, whatever the case might be. So too can I say, hey, Lightroom Classic, show me all the pictures that I identified as being part of the water project, whatever that even means, but that's the name of this collection here. Or a little more clear, the travel calendar for 2025. So show me all the photos that I designated are part of my travel calendar for 2025. I could have used a keyword, for example, travel calendar 2025 as a keyword, and then said, show me photos that have that particular keyword. But that's not quite as discoverable. It's not as obvious. It's not as convenient. And so travel calendar 2025 as a collection, it's just a little bit simpler. It's more discoverable. It's more accessible. It's easier to get to. And so it's just a grouping. It's as though I had searched for images based on criteria of the ones I put in the collection. And so it's just grouping photos together. A couple of key points that you want to understand there. Collections can contain photos from many different folders. In fact, here you'll see I have a couple of images from Japan. I have a photo from a cross-country road trip from Croatia, also from a couple from cross-country road trip from a cruise to somewhere in the South Pacific. There's near Tahiti anyway, on the, gotta think of the name of the river. I'm losing it. I've lost it. I've lost the name. The Amazon. It's a big one. I don't know how I forgot Amazon. It's so big. But in any event, photos from various different folders. So that's one of the advantages of a collection is I can group photos in sort of any abstract way that I'd like based on whatever concept I have. And the photos can come from all different folders. Also, another key point, when I put a photo into a collection, I'm not moving the photo. After all, a collection is not a folder on the hard drive, right? I am also not copying the photo. So if I drag a photo from one folder to another folder, I'm actually moving the photo on the hard drive. But if I add a photo to a collection, I'm not copying, I'm not moving. In essence, you could say the hard drive doesn't even need to be connected to the computer. The hard drive sort of doesn't matter. I'm just making a reference to the photo, grouping it together with some other photos for whatever purpose. This is a feature, by the way, that in many other applications, including other Adobe applications, including the other versions of albums. So collections, albums, they're just groupings of photos. And yeah, so Paul, I think I just sort of answered that question about folders. So if it's a folder, from one folder to another, I'm actually moving the photo. From a folder to a collection, I'm just adding the photo to the collection. The photo will still be in the folder. It will just also be in the collection. Just as if I add a star rating or a keyword to the photo, I've added those details, but I haven't moved the photo, of course. So collections are really no different. Think of a collection essentially as a little bit of metadata. A metadata, a field or flag, if you will, that indicates that the photos have been grouped together in some way. It's just a bit of metadata that's presented a little more differently than other bits of metadata that you might have to go digging for on the right panel in the metadata section, for example. All right. Oh, if moving to a folder, why can't it be undone? Yeah, so this is a tricky message that you get in Lightroom Classic. You'll see a similar message if you rename photos, for example, that it cannot be undone. That just means that you can't use the undo command. So if what was the example I said? If I took a photo from Croatia and dragged it into the cross-country road trip folder, I can't undo that, which means if I use the undo command, it's not putting the photo back into Croatia instead of cross-country road trip. I could still go move the photo again, though. So I can't use the undo command, but I could still undo it myself, essentially, by doing the opposite, so to speak, by moving the photo back where it belonged. All right. And then we also have smart collections. Smart collections are just a way of making, I use that analogy of a collection being like a saved search result. Smart collection is kind of more literally that. So I can make a smart collection based on criteria. I'll show you those a little bit later. So for example, photos that have a particular keyword, let's say trains, since I've got a picture of a train here, and that have a particular star rating, 2 stars or better. So any photo that's got keyword train and 2 stars or better as its rating, add those to a smart collection so that I can more easily get to those particular images based on the criteria. All right, moving right along. Let's talk strategically. Let's talk about folders, the folder structure that you might use. I know many of you have probably heard me talk about this in the past. Yeah, good question. If I'm understanding correct, Barry, if you move an image, will it be reflected in the collection? Yes. So if, for example, so this is an image in the cross-country road trip folder. If I go to that folder, I can right-click and choose to go to folder in library, for example. If I go to that folder, so that's right here, that Southwest road trip folder, and within that contains this image. If I were to move this image, remember it is in that collection right there, Travel Calendar 2025. If I were to move the photo to a different folder, it's still going to be in the collection because the photos in the collection, moving the file on the hard drive won't have any impact. So those collections are pretty durable. It's just that they only exist within Lightroom Classic. All right, moving right along. In terms of that folder structure, I'm sure you've had other photographers who explain to you that what you should do, what your folder structure should look like. So they'll tell you, always use a date-based folder structure, for example, or to use a particular naming convention, or whatever the case might be. I'm not one to do that. My approach is rather to give you my opinion, of which I have many, but rather to encourage you to create a folder structure based on the way you think about your photos. In essence, consider it this way. If I asked you, hey, do you have any pictures of hot air balloons, for example? Would you know how to go find them? No, you might say, well, I'll just use a keyword search, which is fine. But would you know what folder to go to? For me, I would say cross-country road trip and also Spain cycling trip. Took a cycling trip to Spain and was fortunate enough to see some hot air balloons along the way. And if I thought hard, I might be able to come up with a couple of other places where I'd photographed hot air balloons, but none come to mind at the moment. But the point is that ideally you have a folder structure where you have some sense of which folder to go to when you're looking for a particular image. Now, for me, some of you, I'm sure, have hopefully been following me for a little while, paying attention, and you already know what I use as my folder structure. If you weren't sure, you could probably take a pretty good guess just by looking right here. By and large, the way I tend to think about my photos is based on location. My photography tends to revolve around travel. Until the pandemic, my life revolved around travel, but the point is that I tend to think of my photos in the context of where I captured them. And that works for me because I tend to travel for my photography. But even if I don't, even if I'm photographing in my own backyard, I tend to think of it in the context of where it was, not when it was. But if you are a date-based person, number one, I'm impressed. But number two, that's perfectly fine. Whatever works for you in terms of how you think about your photos, that probably could guide you in terms of the folder structure. So I like to say, for wedding photographers, they have it easy, but only when it comes to folder structure. I think the job is very difficult, but folder structure is pretty straightforward. Just make folders based on the name of the bride and groom, of the couple that you're marrying, their last name, for example, or first names if you're more familiar, whatever the case might be, however you think about them, that can be the folder structure. If you're an advertising photographer, it could be based on the name of the client, the company that hired you, or the name of the product, whatever makes sense. If you're an advertising photographer, oh, I mentioned that. If you're an engineer, by which I mean, if you're the type of person who thinks in technical ways, I very often find when I'm presenting in front of a live audience and I ask how many of you organize your photos by date-based folders, and then I say, keep your hands up if you're an engineer, most of the hands tend to stay up. I do not use date-based folders because I hardly remember. I have to look at the calendar to know what month it is, what day it is. I have to stop and think about what year it is, or look at my phone to remind myself of what year it was. And I absolutely could not tell you, what year I traveled to a particular destination. If I want to know a date of travel, I pretty much have to go find the photo and then look at metadata. I'm not going to find the photo based on the date. It's going to be the other way around. But if dates work for you, that's great. I would quiz photographers, say, okay, what date did you capture your favorite waterfall picture? And they would say, oh, this month and this year. And I'd have to take their word for it because I can't see their Lightroom Classic catalog. But point is, how you think about your folder structure, about your photos, I should say, is probably a good way to consider organizing your photos. Now, one exception to that is species. If you're a wildlife photographer or a bird photographer, I do not recommend using a folder structure based on species because it makes more work. If let's say a bird photographer, and so you've got your folders for raptors, and then a subfolder for eagles and a subfolder for bald eagle. Well, now every time you happen to photograph bald eagles, you're going to need to import those photos and then move them into the appropriate folder. So shorebirds, you go to the beach and you photograph some gulls and some sandpipers and some oyster catchers and some brown pelicans. Well, now you import all those photos and you need to move the applicable photos into the applicable folders. Takes additional time, it's extra work, there's a risk of making mistakes, etc. So then you might use, if you are exclusively a bird photographer, for example, and location didn't make sense, if you tend to photograph in the same areas nearby, then it might not make sense to have folders based on location. Then a date-based folder structure might be what works best for you. So whatever makes sense, for me it happens to be location-based, but the key is to have a strategy for those folders and use it consistently. And then also the notion of a flat versus deep folder structure. So with species, I gave the example of birds raptors, eagles, bald eagle. That's a lot of folders, and it creates potentially clutter. It helps to create some precision, but it also creates clutter that can add to confusion, make it more difficult to find what you're looking for. So whenever possible, I recommend having a relatively flat folder structure, meaning I don't have a lot of folders inside folders, inside folders, inside folders. It's usually just a top level folder. So looking at a couple of examples here, here's a folder representing a trip to Japan in 2009, or here's a road trip to Spain in 2013, for example, and no subfolders. So I don't have subfolders based on which city I was visiting in Spain on any given day, or whatever the case might be. When I will create subfolders, though, is when I start to accumulate too many similar folders. And so here you'll notice, for example, that I have a folder for Italy, and below it, so notice, by the way, a little tidbit of trivia for you, there are triangles to the left of the folder names. If it is solid, it means there's one or more subfolders. If it is this kind of dotted appearance, it means there's no subfolders. So if I click on that solid triangle, then I can expand, and you'll see I have Italy 2016, Italy 2017, Italy 2018. And so as I start to accumulate, I think in my actual catalog, I have something like a dozen folders for different trips to Italy. And so it made sense to just put those into a parent folder. I'll show you that a little bit later. But that's about as deep as I go for the most part. And so just basically shallow until I need a little more depth in order to avoid long list of folders and confusion, etc. Essentially, I only like to add subfolders when I find it really is necessary and helpful. When it comes to creating folders, and there are various scenarios where I might do that, managing our folders, we're going to take a look at creating folders first as part of that overall process, though. And so, being able to create folders at various steps of your workflow, essentially, as we'll start off here. Before I do jump into that, I'll get to collections a little bit later, but worth just mentioning this so I don't miss it later. And Fred's question, can I export photos from collections? Yes, absolutely. If you can select a photo and it's not missing, so for example, your external hard drive is connected, then you can export it. Whether you've selected it from a collection, from a folder, doesn't matter. You can still export, and it'll be exporting the source file, of course. All right. And yes, so Paul, I probably won't use that specific example, but I will show you how to create smart collections based on specific metadata criteria. We'll get to that here shortly. All right, so let's import some new photos. So we're going to pretend that I've just gotten back from a trip and I'm ready to import. In reality, I'd be downloading these photos along the way, but let's just make believe, because I think these were from last year in any event, the photos that I'm going to import. So in the library module, I'll go ahead and click the import button down at the bottom of the left panel. That will bring up our import dialog, and we won't worry about that permission at the moment. And so here are some photos from the Palouse last year, so you can see the sources set appropriately. I'm not going to cover all of the details of the import. I'm just going to skim through here, and normally would not import duplicates. Might rename, might apply develop settings. I'll use my import metadata preset keywords. Let's just add Palouse, for example. But more to the point, for our purposes here today, is that I want to put these into a particular folder. So at the top right, I'm going to click the pop-up, and let's choose a destination, which in this case is going to be an unusual folder, in that normally this would be on an external hard drive, but here I've got a webinar demo catalog folder, so I'm going to choose that. But at the top right here, generally speaking, I would set this to my primary storage location for photos. So for me, that's typically my photos external hard drive. For you, it might be the pictures folder or some other folder somewhere else, etc. And so whatever that primary storage location is for your photos. But then down here in the destination section, this is where I want to designate the actual folder that the photos are going to go into. Now, if you're a date-based person and you want automatic date-based folders based on the date of capture, then for the organize pop-up here, you could choose by date and then designate the structure. Slashes here represent folders, dashes are just dashes. And so if you just wanted a folder for each month within a folder for the year, you could choose this option. So you'd have a folder called 2025, being the current year, and then a folder for 08 for the month of August. And so that would be all the photos in this case would go into the August folder. I could also go down here and choose a year, month, and day format. So I'll have the photos captured today would be in a folder called 20, which would be contained within a folder called 08 for August, and which would be contained in a folder called 2025 for the year. And so the key is to be consistent. So generally speaking, if you're using a date-based folder, you would always import to the same folder and always use the same option for that folder structure. But what I'm going to do is not organize by date, but rather to organize into one folder. But I want to designate which folder that is. Since these are my photos, I get to name the folder. And since it's me, it's usually location-based. The Palouse in Eastern Washington State is the way I think of these photos. And so I'm going to turn on the Into Subfolder checkbox, and I'll enter a name in the field here, Palouse 2024. So inside my webinar demo catalog folder, the primary folder location for all of my photos, I'll create a subfolder. Actually, I'll give it the right name, Palouse 2024, not 2204. So Palouse 2024, that folder will be created. So you can see right down here, Palouse 2024 as a new folder. Note, by the way, the fact that it's got a little plus symbol on the folder and that there's italics for the text there, that indicates this folder does not exist, but it's about to be created. So we'll assume that everything else is just perfectly wonderful in terms of those settings, and I'll import those photos so you can see. In this case, by the way, my metadata preset includes assigning a red color label. Oh, thank you. Yeah, Tim, I neglected that. I'll turn off the webcam for the moment. But suffice to say, you were not able to see the, the indication of the primary storage location up at the top right. We'll see it again in a moment now that I've gotten my face out of the way. Thanks, Tim, for that. All right, so yeah, we've imported all of the photos. We're just now building the previews here. So again, red color label to indicate that these photos have not yet been reviewed to identify favorites versus outtakes, and the Palouse metadata, the keyword and metadata for these images, etc. So all the details that I applied during import, again, the point really for our purposes was that we were importing those images. I'm going to insert a different card into the card reader, and then we'll import another. And one of the tricks that I wanted to mention here is that you can see I now have my Palouse 2024 folder. I want to import to that folder, and I want to make sure that I'm importing to the correct place. One of the quick and easy ways to do that, if I want to import to a folder that I can see right here in the folders list, instead of clicking the import button, I'm going to right-click on the applicable folder, so in this case, that Palouse 2024 folder, right-click and choose Import to this folder. That will bring up the import dialog once again, same basic concept. However, now that I've hidden my face from view, thank you, Tim. Thank you, other Tim, I should say. Not thanking myself. Up at the top right, that's where you can see that pop-up, so I can click and choose a different destination, so another destination or some other path where I've imported photos to previously. And then afterward, I can see the actual folder. But notice now, the Palouse 2024 folder is the destination, not the primary storage location, but the Palouse 2024 folder that I right-clicked on. That also means I do not want to create a subfolder, so I want to make sure that the Into Subfolder checkbox is turned off. And so a handy little shortcut when I want to import additional photos into a folder that already exists in Lightroom Classic, in that folders list on the left panel in the library module. So I'll go ahead and import those photos now that we've seen the import aspect of that in any event. And those additional images, don't worry, that looks like a very underexposed image. I would never. All the images would be perfectly exposed, except for here's a bracketed set for HDR. If I had photos that were that poorly exposed that were not part of an HDR bracketed set, I would simply not include them in a demo when I'm sharing my photos. All right, So we can also, there's a variety of different ways that we can create folders, a couple of other ways anyway, that we would create additional folders. Let's take a look at an example. And so I believe, yes, here I have a couple, I thought, oh yes, here, there's one. Can I find, there's the other. So I have a couple of photos here that contain myself. And I, in case it was not obvious, I did not capture these photos. These are photos that were captured by a friend who was on this photo workshop I was leading in the Palouse, and they captured some images along the way. Well, I mentioned I generally like to have a relatively flat folder structure, meaning I would have, here, for example, just a Palouse 2022 folder without any subfolders. However, I didn't take these pictures. These two photos of myself, I obviously didn't capture, and so I want to distinguish those as being from someone else. And so I'm going to create a new folder. There's a couple of ways we can go about that. I could, after I've selected a folder, I can go up to the plus button up here to the right of the folder's heading, and I could choose to add a subfolder, which means place a folder inside the current folder. The other option is I can go to the folder itself, which is typically what I would do just because that's where I am typically when I'm thinking about a folder. And so I would right click on the folder, and then I'm going to create a folder inside. So let's get rid of that tooltip. There we go. I'm going to right click on the folder and choose to create a folder inside of that folder. And so I'm going to call this From Irwin. I could include the selected photos. I'm not going to, just because I want to demonstrate that as part of the next step. But if I turn on this checkbox, include selected photos, the two photos that are currently selected would automatically be moved to this folder. I'm just going to create it as an empty folder. And so right there is that empty folder from Irwin. And so then I can go, oh, there, right there's one of them. I could select both. I'm just going to do this one at a time just to reinforce the concept. So I can drag and drop. I'll get a confirmation dialog. Do I really want to move it? Yes, I'm moving the photo on the hard drive. Oh, and I have the show photos and subfolders checkbox turned on, so I'm going to turn that off. So library, show photos and subfolders. That means show me the photos in this folder and in any subfolders. That sometimes can be confusing. I generally like to have that turned off. So now we can see that photo of me at Palouse Falls has been moved, and here's me in front of some canola. Drag and drop and click the move button, and that photo also then goes into the From Irwin subfolder. I would say thank you to Irwin. Maybe he tuned in. Irwin, if you're here, thank you very much. I'm guessing Irwin did not tune in because he does not use Lightroom Classic. He favors Adobe Bridge rather than Lightroom Classic, so I don't imagine he's tuning in for that, but in any event, those are a couple photos from him. All right, we also can add a folder anywhere we'd like. And so if I click on the plus button, so again, add subfolder means put a folder inside the current folder. I can also add a folder anywhere. This is helpful, for example, if I filled up my hard drive and I've got a brand new hard drive, an external hard drive, I need to create like a pictures folder on that external hard drive so I can actually see it in Lightroom Classic. So whatever purpose, so I can add a folder. Oh, actually, what am I have another folder to import. Oh, I had from Southwest Road Trip. So I'll do this sort of backwards, you might say, meaning I don't need to create this folder based on the example I'm going to provide, but I'll just add the folder to demonstrate the concept. So again, add subfolder is put a folder inside the current folder. Add folder, as opposed to subfolder, just means make a folder anywhere you'd like, on any hard drive, in any storage location, and I'm just going to navigate to the demo folder that I'm using here. But again, this could be the pictures folder, could be an external hard drive, brand new external hard drive, anything I'd like. I'm going to make a new folder though, so I'll click the new folder button, and these are, oh yeah, from El Jefe, my buddy Jeff, who probably is not here either because he's also not a Lightroom Classic user, but if you're here, hello Jeff. So I'll create that folder and just click choose. And now you can see right there is my folder that I've just created. I put it in the same place, so it could have just been a subfolder of an existing folder, but just wanted to illustrate the concept that I can create a folder anywhere I'd like. I actually have some photos that I want to import that I have. Just double check that I've got those. Oh yeah, right there, perfect. So I'm gonna go ahead and just import these. So import to this folder, right click on the folder that I want to import to, choose import to this folder, and on the desktop, somewhere right there, we've got the pictures that El Jefe captured, and I'll turn this off and leave everything else as is. So again, I just created a folder anywhere I'd like, and then I could import photos, or I could have just moved photos, drag and drop photos from one folder to another, for example. And then I have that set of photos. So from a Southwest road trip, actually, as it turns out, which we'll talk about more shortly. All right, and then if I want to make changes, so let's take a look at some change. Actually, I'll do the renaming in the context of some of these other changes. So let's make some changes to our folder structure overall. For example, this El Jefe, from El Jefe folder that I created, well, those are photos that were captured during the Southwest road trip. And so I'd want it to be a subfolder there. So why didn't I just create a subfolder? Because I wanted to show you the process of creating a folder that's not necessarily a subfolder. But now I do want that folder to be a subfolder of the Southwest road trip folder. How do I get it there? Just drag and drop. How do I not do it? By going out to the hard drive and making a change. Again, initiate everything in Lightroom Classic. And so I'll drag that folder, drag and drop the entire folder from El Jefe to the Southwest road trip folder. And my confirmation dialog went over there. I'll bring it back and click move. And sure enough, the folder was moved, the photos were moved, everything was moved on the hard drive. So it's reflected in Lightroom Classic, but it also has changed out on the hard drive as well. If you were paying attention, you might have noticed that when I imported the Palouse photos, that those went into a Palouse 2024 folder rather than into the same location as the other Palouse trips. So I have that Palouse parent folder for my various folders from trips to the Palouse. Well, I want the Palouse 2024 folder to be in that location as well. So again, just a simple drag and drop. So if you didn't use a great folder structure to start with, and you wish you had done something different, no problem. You can make changes after the fact. So you can move things around as needed. In addition, I could create folders. So to take things a little bit of a step further, I can group together. So for example, I have these folders from various trips to Austria. If I want to make a new parent folder for those, first I need to be able to see the parent folder, which in this case I can. So above the Austria folders is the webinar demo catalog folder. I might have hidden that folder. If I right click, in fact, on that parent folder, I can choose to hide this parent so that I'm seeing all these folders as though they were top level folders, which could potentially be confusing. If you happen to know the photos are on an external hard drive in a folder called Tim's Stuff, but inside that is Tim's Photos, and then the subfolders for all of my different trips, for example. But I don't need to see all that extra clutter, and so I might hide those parent folders that don't actually contain any of my photos. But then I might later need to reveal. So I could go add a folder. So just click on the plus to the right of the folders heading and add a folder in the applicable location. I can go navigate out to the appropriate location and create the folder. But it's easier in most cases to just create a subfolder. But to create a subfolder, I need to be able to see the appropriate parent folder. And in this case, that's the folder above my Austria trips folder. So I'm going to right click and choose to show the parent. Where did it go? There it is. I don't know how that missed my view. But in any event, I can right click on a folder and choose to show the parent folder so that, as you can see, here's that webinar demo catalog folder. That's the top level. So now that is my folder where I want to create a subfolder. So instead of adding a folder, navigating out to the hard drive, the appropriate location, etc., instead of using the add folder command, when possible, I suggest using the add subfolder command, just because it's a little less risk of error, a little less confusing potentially. So now I'm going to select my top level folder, and then I could click the plus and choose to add a subfolder, or I could right click and choose to create a folder. And we're going to call this folder Austria. And now I have that empty Austria folder, so I can drag and drop these, in this case just 3 folders, into that parent folder. I can actually also select multiple folders. Nice little handy trick. I can click on the first folder, hold the Shift key, click on the last folder. All of those folders will be selected, which also, by the way, means that I can browse all of the photos from all 3 of those folders in this case. I could also use the controller command key if I need a random assortment, in other words, not just a single range of folders. But now that I have the Austria folders selected, I will drag and drop them into that Austria parent folder, clicking the move button to confirm that that's what I want to do. And sure enough, now I have the parent folder. And part of the reason I do that is to just reduce clutter, because now I can collapse that Austria folder and collapse that Italy folder and collapse that Toulouse folder, for example, so that I have less clutter on the list there. I might also want to split my folders into more than one folder. And so, for example, right here, I have a trip that the folder is called Iceland, Paris, Prague. This was a single trip, and I have photos from Iceland. So I went to Iceland, then I went to Paris, then down here I went to Prague, and as it happens, I then went back to Paris. And so one big trip, but to me, each of those destinations was a trip unto itself. And so even though it was one trip, you can see with the folder name that reflects that, Iceland, Paris, Prague, I actually prefer to have these, I would prefer to have these in individual folders. And so let's create some folders. So I'm just going to go to my webinar demo catalog, the top level parent folder, and I'll create a folder in here, and we'll create a folder for Paris. And I don't even know what year this was. I'd have to go look at the metadata, so we'll just leave the year off of it. And Prague. So I'm going to create a folder for Prague. Create. So now I have those folders here. They're obviously empty, but I have them as available destinations. And then I'll just rename. So one of the other things I can do is rename a folder, right click, rename, and we'll just call this Iceland. And can I see my metadata? No. Let's go ahead and check. What year was this? 2009, a long time ago. So rename, and we'll call this Iceland 2009. I obviously then could add, Paris, right click, rename, and add the year to the Prague folder. Notice, by the way, in some cases, I might use the name of the country. In others, the name of the city. That's probably not ideal. So for example, it's Iceland, which is a country, Paris, which is a city, and Prague, which is a city. I'm not being consistent there. I'm okay with that, because the reason I'm not being consistent is that that's the way I think about those photos. Yes, I flew into Reykjavik, into Keflavik, but I didn't stay there, and I did a tour of, various areas around Iceland. When I went to Paris, okay, technically I didn't stay in Paris. We also went to the coast to, well, I can't pronounce it properly, but it's a C-A-E-N. It's like Caen, but it's K, and they sort of leave off the N, and I'm not very good with French pronunciation, but in any event, Prague was just Prague. And so those are the ways that I think about those trips, even though it might not be consistent, might not be perfectly accurate in terms of, the way I would normally name my folders, in terms of that consistency. But in any event, we'll forgive that. At least I will. I hope you will too. And so then, let's see, there's the end of Iceland. So here we get to the Paris, or at least the first Paris section. I'm going to click on the first photo that is Paris, and then hold the Shift key and click on the last photo that is Paris, and then point to any of the selected thumbnails, click, drag, drop into Paris, click move to confirm, and then this is Prague all the way through right there. Drag and drop to the Prague folder, click the move button to confirm, and then here to the end is also Paris. So select them all, click, drag, and drop, and move. All right, and then, so again, we could also, I have one other example here to consolidate. I'm going to make this one easy on myself. So Toulouse 2016, I created this silly date-based folder structure. But remember how we can browse photos in subfolders? Well, all of the photos in all of these date base, so day-based in this case, with a month folder above and theoretically a year folder above that. I'm going to select the top-level parent, which is the Palouse 2016 folder. I'm going to go to the Library menu and choose to show photos in subfolders so that when I'm browsing the top-level folder, I'm seeing the photos from all folders within. Select all. This is going to seem a little silly, odd, unusual. If I am browsing all the photos, remember I've turned on Show Photos in Subfolders. We can see the check mark there indicating that. So even though I've selected the Palouse 2016 folder, I'm browsing all of the photos in all of these subfolders. When I select all of the photos, therefore, I've selected all the photos from all the subfolders. So now when I drag and drop, I'm going to be dragging and dropping to the current folder. But the photos aren't in that folder, but they're about to be. So it may seem a little odd, but I've selected all the photos from those various subfolders, and I'm going to drag and drop them into the appropriate, in this case, Palouse 2016 folder. Click the Move button to confirm. All those photos get moved. It looks like nothing happened, but notice now that all of the numbers for the subfolders are at 0. And so I can just go to the 06 folder, right-click, and remove. If those folders are truly empty, it's okay if there's subfolders, but if there's no photos, no documents, no audio files, etc., if they're truly empty on the hard drive, they will be deleted. The folders, the empty folders, will be deleted as well. All right, and then collections, which we'll talk about briefly here in terms of some of the ways you might use collections. As I mentioned, a collection is a way to group photos together for a particular purpose. What purpose? Anything you'd like. For me, the typical example is for a project. I'm going to present a photo slideshow, or I'm going to be teaching a class, or I'm going to make a book or a calendar, or I want to share with family and friends, whatever the case might be. Or I just like looking at these pictures from time to time, so I want to have an easy way to get to them. And so collections, pretty straightforward. Let's just make, let's make a Palouse calendar, for example. And so on the collections section on the left panel here, I'll click the plus button and create a collection. And we'll just call this Palouse calendar. Include selected photos. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to turn on, though, set as target. Actually, I'm not going to do that because I'll come back to that in a moment. So I'm just going to make the collection. So there it is, Palouse calendar, right there, no images. And since I'm in the folder for Palouse, or one of them anyway, let's set a filter based on star rating and see. I just want to take a quick glance here. Oh, none there because I haven't star rated yet. So there's a crop duster coming head on. To add to a collection, I can just drag and drop. So drag and drop. I am not moving the photo. I'm not copying the photo. I'm just making a reference to the photo in the collection. So there, that image is in the collection now. I could also remember I had that set as target collection option. The default target collection is the quick collection. That's that little plus symbol, which means if I press the letter B as in boy, I wish this keyboard shortcut had something that I could remember, like Q for quick collection or something, but it's the letter B as in boy on the keyboard is the keyboard shortcut for the target collection, which is by default the quick collection. I'm going to go to the Palouse calendar collection, right click, set as target collection, the plus goes there. Now, any photos I find, I could just press the letter B as in boy on the keyboard to add that to the quick collection, and that picture, and that picture, and that one. No, I didn't add that one yet. Notice, by the way, a little circle appears to indicate a photo that is added to the target collection. And I can go find, oh, I like that one, and I like that one, etc. So, I can just add photos as I see fit to the applicable collection. I'll turn off my filter, see if we quickly here. Oh, that sunrise barn looks nice, and bunch of paragliders. So you get the idea. I can add photos to that collection. Oh, I need one more because I somehow managed to get up to 11, although there's a couple similars here. So maybe I'd remove that image from the collection by pressing the letter B again. I can also right-click a photo within the collection and choose to remove it from the collection. But let's just go quickly find two more. I'll turn on my filter. That one I did. That one's vertical. That one's already added. And so we'll add that one to the quick collection. Not that I actually need to make sure that I have 12, but it's calendar, so I want 12 images for my collection. So again, there's just one of the ways that we can add photos to a collection. And the same basic concepts apply. I can rename a collection just by right-clicking and rename. I can create a collection set. So if I click on the plus and choose to create a collection set, I can, let's say, call this projects, create. So then I could take my various projects, the collections, put them into the projects collection set. So it's sort of like a parent folder, subfolder type of a relationship, etc. I can also create smart collections. And as I mentioned, those are collections that are automatic. And so there was, I knew I was going to forget what the criteria were, but I think it was star rating and pick flag, for example. I'm just going to use something else. And so hopefully, let's take a look and see. We have no images that have, okay, we have some, we'll use Italy as our example for a smart collection. So I could go create a smart collection. So I'm going to click on the plus button to the right of collections. Instead of just a regular collection, I'm going to choose to create a smart collection. And we're going to call this Italy Favorites. I won't worry about putting it inside a collection set, although I obviously could. Let's define our criteria. So, well, if it's from Italy, how am I going to go about identifying that? Well, I could say that the source is a folder that contains the particular text. There's my field that contains Italy, for example. Or I could use other metadata. So in this case, for example, under other metadata, which is funny since keywords are a really important piece of metadata, you'd think it would be more prominent, but it's in the other metadata category. I can choose keywords. Keywords contains Italy. I'm not sure how many of my photos actually in this catalog, this demo catalog, actually have Italy as a keyword, but we'll take a chance with it. But that's just Italy. What about my favorites? Well, to me, favorite means that it has a star rating. So I'm going to click the plus button over here to add an additional row, and I'll set that as rating is greater than or equal to, let's take a chance with 2 stars. I use a rating system, by the way, where 1 star is a keeper, 2 is best of a trip, 3 is best of the year, 4 is best of a decade. So, you get the idea. Hopefully I have some images that have both a keyword of Italy and a star rating of 2 or greater. I'm going to match all the criteria. It's not or, it's and. So all of the criteria, not just any of the criteria. I don't want photos that have a 2-star rating even though they don't have Italy as a keyword. And I don't want photos that have Italy as a keyword even though they have a 0-star rating. I only want photos that match all those criteria. Fingers crossed. I'm going to create. So again, keyword contains Italy. Star rating is greater than or equal to 2 stars. Create. I only ended up with 3 photos in the collection. I can do better. Let's go back and see all of our Italy photos. Here's all the 2 stars. So I'm going to go to my keyword list and filter it. So let's add Italy as a keyword to that image and to that image. And let's actually browse all the photos with Italy as a keyword. And you see here, for example, has Italy as a keyword, but only 1 star. Let's just upgrade that to 2 stars. And that one's already 2. We'll give that one a 2-star rating as well. Well, the pigeon, he gets a 2-star rating. And now, if we go back to Italy favorites, we've gotten that up to 8 images because these 8 images all have a 2-star or greater rating, and they have Italy as a keyword. If I were to remove the keyword from any of the photos, they would obviously not fit the criteria of the smart collection anymore. Or if I reduce the star rating, so this image, I'll reduce the star rating to 1, and as soon as I press the number 1 on the keyboard, the image will disappear because it's not meeting the criteria of the smart collection. Now, of course, the smart collection will update automatically, but this is not affecting the hard drive. The photos haven't disappeared, they haven't been copied, etc. All right, and then let's see here. There was a question, how to add keywords to multiple images quickly. Simple. In fact, let's say, in this case, any photo that's in one of my Italy folders probably deserves Italy as a keyword, whereas, is a photo that was captured in Italy in any event. So I can select all the photos. So here's all the photos in all of my Italy folders in the grid view, very important, in the grid view, select all, and then I can, for example, on the keyword list. Now notice I see a dash here, and it's a checkbox, but if it has a dash, it means some of the photos have that keyword. If it's empty, it means none of those photos have the keyword. And going to the third option here, with the check mark, it means now all of those photos have the keyword of Italy. And there was also the question moments ago, Cliff, why does Palouse 2022 have a red icon to the right of it? And that's because, in theory, I need to review the photos in that folder. I mentioned that I was using a metadata preset that adds a red color label to my photos on import. Well, I selected it. I don't know that I specifically mentioned it. The red color label is part of my metadata preset that I assign on import, and that tells me these photos need to be reviewed to identify favorites versus outtakes. The reason the folder has the color mark, it's also a color label, is to let me know, hey Tim, these photos need to be reviewed. So the Palouse 2024 folder, for example, is the case. So right-click, add color label to folder, and I've even changed my definitions. This normally would be red. It's called to review in my case. The Palouse 2022 folder, that's already been reviewed, so I can add a color label. That's a funny one. I can add a color label of none, meaning I can remove the color label so that it no longer has that marker. But notice Palouse 2022 has a little star. I can mark a folder as a favorite. So I can add it to favorites, or I can mark it as no longer a favorite. So for example here, I can add to favorite or remove from favorite. And I'm not sure if it's a change or a bug, but it also used to be mark as favorite and unmark favorite. I don't know if they're changing it. If you use a different feature for favorites, I've noticed this changes. So if the command looks different, it's possibly a glitch, possibly a change in Lightroom Classic. But I can right click and add a folder to favorites, for example. I have a couple of them there. But yeah, I've noticed some odd glitches related to that favorites feature. For collections, we can also add a color label. So let's say, green, for example, for the collection. All right. And let's see here. I believe, yeah, that was the key points I wanted to mention in terms of collections. I know we've already run a little bit of overtime, but I do want to see if I can address some of the questions here. So question from Tim from a little earlier, do you alter the file names? I actually don't tend to rename my images, but you absolutely can rename during import. It's token based, so you define criteria. So you could keep the existing file name as one of those criteria and add your name or your photography business name, etc. Or you could change the name altogether to indicate, have a date-based folder file name structure based on when you captured the images based on the metadata. And so if I just go to library rename photo right there, you can see that, I often use, for example, custom plus a sequence. So these photos are, Paris. I mean, I've only selected one photo at the moment, so I wouldn't really rename in this way. But, Paris 2009 and a sequence number starting at 1, and you can see the example there. I can make this, Tim Grey photo, Paris 2009, etc. But yeah, so I don't tend to rename just because I don't find it all that helpful. I don't generally send photos out to clients, for example, and so I don't need to have unique special names. So I don't tend to, but you most certainly can rename both during import and later in your workflow if you prefer. And yeah, so RAW plus JPEG. So generally speaking, I do not recommend RAW plus JPEG because you don't need RAW plus JPEG. If you're using Lightroom Classic, as soon as you import, if you generate standard previews, there's your JPEG. So in the library module, these are all JPEG images that we're looking at, even though they are RAW captures. These are Canon RAW captures. You can see the .cr2 right there. If I want to see the real thing, then I go to the develop module where the raw image will be rendered. But the JPEG previews are right here. And so to me, there's no need to capture RAW plus JPEG. If you do, and if for some reason you want that, just keep in mind that by default, Lightroom Classic will copy both the RAW and the JPEG, but it will not import the JPEG into Lightroom Classic. If you want to import the JPEG along with the original RAW, then in Preferences on the General tab, you need to turn on this Treat JPEG files next to RAW files as separate photos, which means for RAW plus JPEG pairs, it'll now bring in both of those. And let's see here. See if we've got a couple other questions here. Yeah, so using this concept of the way you think about your photos driving your folder structure, is that really any different from using keywords? No, not really, other than the folder structure being a little bit more discoverable. Just make sure then that you're saving the keywords out to the source files. By default, Lightroom Classic only saves metadata in the catalog. It does not save them out to the source photos. One of the reasons I like folders, so for example, I use folders where I could just organize everything based on collections and put everything, all my photos into a single folder. But what about the day when Lightroom Classic no longer exists? Maybe that'll never happen. But if it does, and I don't have a good viable solution for migrating from Lightroom Classic to something else, I'm going to be really glad that I have the folders. Similarly for the keywords, so if we go to our catalog settings dialog on the metadata tab, I want to make sure that the automatically write changes into XMP checkbox is turned on so that the standard metadata, things like star ratings and keywords, will be saved out to the source files. This doesn't preserve everything, but it preserves most of the key metadata. But yeah, it's perfectly fine to, in the absence of a more detailed folder structure, more to the point, in addition to a detailed folder structure. So if you use a date-based folder structure, you can still find your photos based on, let's say, location by adding keywords. Or I can still find photos based on date, even though I don't use a date-based folder structure, by filtering metadata based on date and time of capture, for example. Yeah, good point. Collections, Tim points out that you could use a collection as a way to sort of mark photos before a big task. So if you're about to move photos from one folder to another, a hard drive to another, you could first add them to a collection, a collection called I'm about to move these photos, for example. And then that way, after the move, you know what photos were supposed to go where, and it makes it a little bit easier to troubleshoot. So I'm sure in your workflow, you could find a variety of other ways like that, where you could use a collection as kind of a temporary repository to help identify photos that you need to do a particular thing to, perform a particular task on, and as a way to just kind of keep track of, whether or not that actually happened. And yes, so in a smart collection, can I have only photos that contain a certain two people? Yes. So there's for example, the face detection feature. So I don't imagine, we'll see. I'm going to let it start finding faces. So in the people view, well, we already started finding some people. So in people view, I could identify people. So I'll type my name there. And that person is an identified person. That keyword also happens to be a people keyword. So I identify the name of a person. It also gets added as a keyword. So I could use that. So if I make a smart collection, for example, and so keyword contains Tim Gray, and then we'll make this other one, other metadata, keywords contains, well, actually, I could have just done gray in this case, but if I will just use first, well, I'll make them both. And it's all, so now if I click create, I've got a smart collection, oops, and we'll switch to the grid view, smart collection that contains, presumably, photos with either, let's see what our criteria did I use, all. So keyword contains Tim Gray, keyword contains Renee Gray, I didn't give it a name, save. So interestingly, it didn't do a proper job there because it should only be pictures that have both of us as keywords versus the any option. So, and maybe the space is throwing it. So let's go back to all. If so, I'm going to call this a bug. Oops. Tim and Renee. Very interesting. So even though keywords can have spaces, I just discovered an apparent bug in Lightroom that can, well, actually, if it contains all, might do the trick there. But anyway, we won't troubleshoot that at the moment. But yes, you could use that feature to identify photos that contain. Now, if you use the any option, you'll see pictures of Tim, pictures of Renee, and pictures of Tim and Renee. If you use the all, then you should only see pictures of both. But it looks like maybe the space is throwing that a little bit. All right, let me see real quickly. Is data from collections saved in the backup process? So if you're talking about the backup of the catalog, yes. If you back up your catalog, it's literally backing up the catalog. That includes everything in Lightroom, meaning as far as the metadata, the keywords, collections, smart collections, etc. It's backing up all those details. All right. I think, see if I got any other questions here real quick that I missed along the way. Good question. Do I create a new catalog when it gets too big and slows down the processing? No. That used to be an issue in Lightroom Classic in the early days, that if you got up to about 30,000 photos, which is almost none, that the performance would really start to suffer. That was fixed quite a while ago. And so I would not recommend creating an additional catalog. My current catalog, obviously I demo with catalogs of smaller size, but my real catalog has almost 400,000 photos in it, and the performance is just as good as when I'm demonstrating on a catalog with 3,000 photos. So I definitely would not, and that just leads to confusion. If you've got multiple catalogs, I'd highly recommend having just a single catalog. If the performance is starting to drag, then I would suggest that you might want to make sure to optimize your catalog. As part of the backup process for backing up the catalog, you can also choose to enable it. It's enabled by default, but to optimize the catalog. So one last question I'll cover. By the way, if I didn't get to your question in the comments, please feel free to send those to the form that I mentioned. And I see there were a couple there. And so I'll follow up via email on those. So timgray.me/question will get you to the Google form where you can submit those questions, and I'll either respond directly as best I can, or try to include those in an upcoming Ask Tim Gray email newsletter. So Georgette's question here, I usually download photos into a specific folder I create on my hard drive and then import them into Lightroom. Use dated folders. So that wouldn't work as easily, for my location-based structure. I actually don't recommend that approach, though, because to me there's just too much risk. You forget to import a particular folder, or you forget to download particular photos, etc. I recommend using the import feature directly into Lightroom. You can create the folder directly at the point of import, as I demonstrated earlier. So that's my recommendation. If your workflow is working for you, that's perfectly great, and I'm okay with that. But in general, I don't recommend downloading your photos and then importing them to Lightroom Classic, because you can import them into Lightroom Classic as part of the process of copying them from your media cards, for example. So there's some exceptions. If you're scanning photos, you're not going to put them on a media card. You just save them to the appropriate folder directly on the hard drive, in which case you could then import from that folder. So it's not a terrible thing to do. It's just, to me, that there's a risk of confusion, a risk of having something get missed along the way with that kind of a two-step workflow. So, all right, with that, we will wrap up. I did go a little bit over time. Of course, I started slightly late because of a couple of glitches that I had as well. I want to bring up just real quickly a reminder of that question form. If you've got any other follow-up questions, or if I missed your question in the chat, please feel free to point your web browser to timgray.me/question, and I will try to address as many of those questions as I possibly can, or respond to you via email. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining me today. A quick reminder, if you've got a mess in Lightroom, or you want to figure out how to clean things up, tidy up your workflow, don't forget about that coupon code WebinarMess, all one word, no spaces, to get $20 off the Cleaning Up Your Mess in Lightroom Classic. That'll take it down to just $59. I forget how many hours of content, but there's a lot of info there. And you can just go to GreyLearning.com to get more info on that. And if you haven't already, I would encourage you to sign up. You can join for free to watch all the classes. I believe there's 5 days, something like 45 classes, if I remember correctly, all in. you've got, I think it's 24 hours to watch all the classes from each day, something along those lines. But you can also get a VIP pass so that you have lifetime access to all the recordings of all classes, as well as notes from all of the instructors for all of the classes. So you can join for free. Go to bit.ly, bit.ly, bit.ly/Grey, Grey Summit 25. If you pay attention to my Ask Tim Gray email newsletter, I'll also have links in there and some reminders. But you can sign up for free. If you're interested in a VIP pass, be sure to check that out as well for the additional benefits. But it is sure to be a great time myself. And you can see, I won't count how many it is. I think it's something like 15 instructors, somewhere in that neighborhood. A bunch of great folks putting on some really good classes. So I hope you'll join me for that. In the meantime, though, thanks again for joining me for this presentation as part of the GreyLearning Live webinar series. I appreciate you hanging around and engaging. Some great questions and comments. I'll try to review those as well. But again, if you submit any of those additional questions on that form, I'll be able to address those in an upcoming edition of my Ask Tim Gray email newsletter. So until next time, thanks very much for tuning in. I appreciate it and hope to see you again for another presentation as part of the GreyLearning Live webinar series. Thanks very much.